The last thing that we're going to cover here in Unit 2 is how we move back and forth between different units of measurement using what's called dimensional analysis. The example that we're going to use here is if we wanted to convert from 6.6 meters into micrometers. Now, the first thing that I always do when I'm doing a conversion factor type problem is I come up with an equivalence statement. Now, what is the purpose of that equivalence statement? Well, the purpose of it is to formally say that I know that 1 meter is the same as a million or 10 to the sixth micrometers. Those two things are equivalent. And when you divide equivalent things in math, you get the number 1. And that's how this whole process works. We're not changing the actual value of the number. We're simply changing the units with which it's being expressed. I draw myself, it almost looks like a little bridge. This long bar here means division. Every time I hit one of these horizontal bars, that means multiply. I'm leaving a space for my answer with the correct units of what I want in my final answer. The next step is to take each piece of my equivalence statement and to substitute it in to the corresponding spot to make a fraction. The goal is I want to cancel the units that I'm beginning with in my top left corner. So I want meters to disappear. So that means I would take 1 meter and place it in the bottom part of this fraction that I'm creating. If I want micrometers to be the unit that's left over by the end of it, I want to make sure that's in my numerator. So that means that this piece of the equivalence statement is going to be placed here. Now again, just to remind you, this number, 10 to the 6 micrometers divided by 1 meter, it's the same exact quantity. So I'm essentially multiplying by the number 1. But I'm taking 6.6 and I'm changing the unit that it's being expressed in. 6.6 times 10 to the 6th divided by 1. I can still do that math operation, but I don't necessarily need to because I know that that's not going to change my answer. That's going to give me 6.6 times 10 to the 6th micrometers as my final answer. So the way that I move through this dimensional analysis chart is I take anything on the top, multiply it, divide by anything on the bottom, done. I'm going to give you 2 examples to try yourself that involve one step. The answers are listed below, so take a few minutes and go ahead and try these. We'll spend some time in class going over these if you need extra help. Okay, the last type of problem that I'm going to show you how to do is, well, what if you have to do this in 2 steps instead of 1? A clue that this might take us 2 steps is the fact that I know that I'm dealing with a prefix unit. I'm dealing with kiloliters. I'm going into another prefix, milliliters. This might take us 2 steps. I'm actually going to write two equivalence statements. The one that has kiloliters. 1 kiloliter is the same as 1,000 or 10 to the third liters. And 1 liter is the same as 1,000 milliliters. So those are my 2 equivalence statements that are setting my equality between those 2 terms. I'm going to use each one of them as a separate fraction in my work. So I'm going to set up my division bar. I know I'm going to need at least 1 fraction to get started. I know that I eventually want to be in kiloliters, but let's not worry about where I'm headed at the end. Let's focus just on the first step, which is making this fraction to get milliliters to disappear, leaving me with something else. Well, I have milliliters in this equivalent statement up here, and I have my liters equal to that. So that's probably the first step, is to get rid of milliliters by putting 1,000 milliliters on the bottom. And I know that that's the same as 1 liter, but I'm still not in the units that I want. Okay, so let's just ignore our beginning part of this problem. Just treat this as though it's 1 step. How would I get from capital L to KL, right? But here's my equivalent statement up here that I'm going to need to do that. I know that 1,000 liters is the same as 1 kiloliter. I'm going to need to put liters on the bottom and kiloliters on the top. So the way that I'm going to move through this and do my math operations, 5.6 times 1 times 1, that's not going to change my number, divided by 1,000 divided by 1,000 gets me to 5.6 times 10 to the negative 6th kiloliters. So sometimes it's more helpful to put this or set these conversion factors up so that you're doing it in 2 steps instead of 1. Here's another one that might require 2 steps. I'm going to let you try this on your own. Pause the video, Take a moment to try this, and the answer is listed below. I have a few more problems for you to try. Some of these might take only one step, some might take two. I have the answers listed below. Pause the video. Go ahead and try these yourself. If you need help, we're going to go over these in class. The last part of this chapter deals with more advanced concepts with conversion factors, so I'm going to make that a separate video where we go over some multi-step conversion factor type problems that don't necessarily have to do with metric or SI prefixes based on powers of 10.